Hey everyone, it's Evan here from the Trade Risk on Friday, August 18th, here with a weekend market recap video. We're going to cover all of the major markets, the current market environment, and then finish off looking at some sector analysis. So happy Friday. There's a lot to cover, so let's jump right into the video here. The S&P 500 finished off the day here on Friday. Fairly boring, fairly flat, down just 38 cents on the day in the SPY ETF here. You can see down 0.16%. Let's look at the weekly chart first. You can see here down a little over 0.5%. So getting some mild follow through to last week's sort of snap of multi-week support here. And you can see now we are below the 8-period rising EMA, or actually declining now EMA here on the weekly chart, still above the 20-period moving average now on the weekly. Now back to the daily chart here, you can see a few things have happened. First, we are below last week's pivot low here, so below the lows that we made from Thursday. If you recall, that was clearly here the big sort of technical breakdown day. We stabilized on Friday. We had this nice bounce up and start of the week here on Monday, and that bounce ultimately faded and actually started this process of a lower high and lower low scenario that translates into a downtrend in the very short term here, with this being the swing high, swing low, lower swing high, and now we have a new lower low here based on Thursday and Friday's action of this week. So we have this series of lower highs in place now. We have a break of this trend line. We have an uptick in volume. We have breadth that is declining, deteriorating a bit here. You can see I put up a post. There's various metrics you could look at. You could argue some are exhausted here on the downside or overextended to the downside. Maybe entirely true, but we have all of these sort of changes of character in the market here taking place over the past couple of weeks. And I mean, that really is to say, this quiet sort of grinding uptrend that we've been in for most of this year is starting to finally experience a little bit of change here. And whether or not it leads to something bigger, that's an entirely different question. That's the sort of prediction game that we're certainly not going to try and solve and answer and play in this video. But it's certainly a time to take notice, and depending on your strategy, your time frame, you are making adjustments when you see this type of action occur. Now, that could mean just having more cash on hand. It could be trading smaller position sizes. It could be having less positions on. Whatever the case is, I think it's definitely a time to at least take notice. Whether or not that translates to actually doing anything in your own strategy or portfolio is an entirely different story. If we go to, or if we look here at this bigger picture now, this 240 level, this was support back here in July, early July, end of June. That's where the market bounced and it got this nice rally to new highs. See if this selling continues. We're going to want to pay very close attention here to this 240 level, because again, going to the weekly chart, this is actually going to start to coincide with multi-month support, and this would be a very big change in character if we started to get a close below the 20-period moving average. If we start to get a close below multi-month lows, that's something we haven't seen all year long. We've basically been riding this 8 EMA up on the weekly chart and really respecting sort of multi-week, multi-month support. So if we see selling pressure continue, keep a close eye on 240. That would, I think, perk the attention of some of those longer term holders. And if we do come with a strong bounce to start the week, I know that looks improbable. It looks like we're going to just gap down and the world's going to end. That's exactly how things sort of looked last week too, but take a look at what happened here. Very similar sort of candle and situation. We had this big technical breakdown candle here on Thursday that led to this failure to hold highs and kind of very pessimistic looking inside day here on Friday, and then that gave way to a 1% move higher on Monday. Well, we got very similar situations. Of course, the candle's not quite an inside day, and it is more progress to the downside. But that being said, you could still not rule out some type of gap higher, and all of a sudden we have a very similar situation to last week, and maybe this is a double bottom that sticks. Okay, this is of course hypothetical, but really the point here is just to open your mind up and point out some different situations and different scenarios. The way we look at things, of course, 8 and 20 period EMA, that's what we like to use, those moving averages there for fast momentum, just to give us a overall bias on trend. And you can see right now that is bearishly aligned, prices below it, so we again want to be cautious here. So that's really the landscape here in the S&P 500. We made some downside progress here on the week, down 58 basis points. We're below the 8 period EMA. We got this series of lower highs and lower lows developing with an uptick in volume. It's time to be cautious. Again, I'll certainly leave what that actually means for your trading and your individual strategy to yourselves. If we go to the IWM, you can see here down a little over 1% on the week. And once again, this is crossing below and breaking below a very critical and long-term sort of trend line extending from the December, basically the December of 2016 all the way to current prices. We've bounced here many times throughout this year, and this time we're starting to crack below it. So again, very interesting and points to take notice here in the IWM as we follow through lower. 8 and 20 period very much pointing down and racing lower. And the NASDAQ 100 still best in class here and not taking out last week's lows. You can see it did get the uptick in volume, but holding above last week's lows here. So still staying very much resilient. And I think on Friday we saw a lot of those large cap, those big cap tech names that make up a good weighting in the Qs, really staying more resilient towards the end of the week here. And I think that's what kept us above last Friday's lows. One thing to point out with the Qs, we got this open gap here from the 12th. Does this want to get filled? Will this ultimately get filled? It did get filled in the SPY and the IWM on those days, so let's pay attention to that next week. So that is the overall market landscape. I think you get a pretty good sense of what's going on there. Let's take a look at some other major markets here. TLT getting a bit of a rally this week, still not a tremendous amount, slight upside progress here, 15 basis points to the upside. This, again, as I've been pointing out in this video, is a position that we hold. We got involved in this back here on the 1st, and we did take some profits. Lucky enough to get towards the highs of the day, really near the open of the day. We took half of this trade off in TLT, and we're trading this via TMF. But, we have half of this position still on. We've raised up our stop. We're going to see how much more this trend can continue. But for now, 8 and 20 period are heading higher. Again, still looking at these highs here from June to see if that's the ultimate target and retest. If it fails here, if it starts to roll over, we'll very likely be out of that trade in short order. GLD had a down week this week as well. Tried to push higher, but fell almost 50 basis points, almost 0.5% here on the weekly chart, but you can see it's holding up. It's at resistance. It's staying fairly resilient. The 8 and 20 period are up there on the weekly chart, and we had a pretty high volume day, kind of a open gap higher that failed and closed red on the day. So fairly short-term bearish price action printing there on gold, but longer term, this trend remains higher here. So something to pay attention to. In silver, very much in the same situation, down slightly on the week, but you can see trying to hold up here at this trend line, this downtrend line here, extending from April lows or the April highs. So again, silver trying to remain resilient. Trend is up here in the short term. Let's see if it can push through this 1630 level and continue higher. If we go to USO, had a really strong snapback here on Friday. Not a tremendous amount of volume, but you can see basically brought it back to flat on the week here. So bulls are defending this breakdown. Remember, we've talked about this trend line, and now we really want to see if it can get back above this trend line, get back above $10 here in the USO, and all of a sudden we have at the very early stages of a potential false breakdown here. Still would want to be cautious. This isn't clean enough for me, although this is a pretty loud price candle here, so it is something I would pay attention to. Again, volume not so significant, but I definitely am watching this, but nothing really screaming at me for a trade. Natural gas, a bit more interesting here, particularly if it can start to clear back above 660 or so. If it can put in this higher low and start to move higher here, I like the potential in natural gas. So I'm going to be watching that next week. Volume really drying up here over the past, basically all of this week, really just slowed down quite a bit in natural gas. So that is everything on the major markets. Let's take a look at some sectors. and really it looks pretty rough out there. There's a lot of sloppy sectors. IYT, we talked about the nice bounce it had last week, or really to start the week in our midweek video. We talked about this. It was up a quick, 2.25%, whatever this move was, but it equally just gave it right back, and it's below these recent lows. So IYT, again, we were maybe looking at some optimistic, outperformance there at the beginning or the mid of this week, and quickly that has turned back to the sell side. Not a lot of volume though. You can see just really trading at average or below average this whole week. So, we'll have to see if something picks up there to show us that maybe there's a better spot for a bottom or some more capitulation. But for now, not much in the clues for volume. If it can quickly get back above 165, if it can hold in here around these recent lows, that would be a good save by the bulls. But for now, it looks pretty darn vulnerable. XLF. So XLF looked promising at the beginning of Friday here. I was actually eyeing this and some of these names in here for potential trade, but didn't quite hold on to those gains. It did manage to hold positive on the day, but I really would have liked to see, basically what we would have had here was an open gap lower and then a push into the green and basically recovery of this support. I like that as a potential trade, as a potential reversal trade opportunity. But again, it's certainly not ruled out. It did get green on the day, just barely. You can see volume slight uptick. But XLF, I'm still paying attention to it. If it can pop above, say, today's highs, Friday's highs, early next week, you may have, again, a nice little trade opportunity to move back into the upper end of that range. So it's something I'll be paying attention to next week. And energy is finally, putting an end to this downslide that it's had for the past couple of weeks. But this is pretty ugly here. Got an uptick in volume. It was red early in the day, moved green, finished up 0.5%. So there are, some slight constructive action. But don't forget, USO is up, 3.5%. So just about budging XLE from this downtrend. So definitely in a world of hurt here. But maybe this is some type of max pain that's being inflicted at this point. But this downtrend is fierce and it is tough to fight it. Always has been. All these little attempts in here have really just been met with selling. So that is the recap for this week. I hope you guys had a good week trading, avoided some of this downturn in the market. So stay selective out there. Thanks so much for watching. And again, if you're new here and you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, do so. Bottom right-hand corner. Stay up to date with all the latest videos that we put out. Thanks again and have a good weekend.